The Powder Mage Trilogy by Brian McClellan. This series is falling into a category I'm finding myself more and more often falling into, where I am not going to be taking the time to review every single book because I just don't have fully enough to say. I review the first and then I get through the second and I'm like, all right, a lot of the same things as the first. I don't want to waste your time, so why don't I just do a series review once I'm done? And because it's a trilogy, that's rather easy. Now, that's not meant to be taken as there's not a lot to discuss in these books. No, the Powder Mage Trilogy is a series that starts good, and I would say ends great. Many people haven't had ventures into Flintlock fantasy yet, which is fantasy that has, bang-bangs in it, guns, cannons, artillery. That's the setting of the Powder Mage Trilogy, and there's probably no better entry to that subgenre of fantasy than this trilogy, at least I've come across. At its core, the Powder Mage Trilogy is military Flintlock fantasy, but that doesn't mean it's nothing but dumb action. There's a nice overcoating of political intrigue and moving of nations that really helps propel the story and raise the stakes in an incredibly intriguing way. The fans of this series tend to be fairly die-hard, and I completely understand why. The characters shine oh so brightly. There's a father and son duo at the real center core of this series, really standing near the center of all these major nation-moving events that are the Powder Mage Trilogy, and you will become, I almost guarantee it, addicted not just to them as characters, but their relationships with each other and those they develop with others around them. I have a giant soft spot in my heart for father-son or mother-son, mother-daughter, father-daughter relationships, because they always just seem to be so tactfully handled from authors, unlike a lot of times friendships, which are just they're friends, believe me. And Brian certainly understands how to deliver emotionally impactful father-son moments, no doubt. So yes, the setting is a bit alternative. It's not just traditional fantasy, there are pew-pow bangs, and the characters shine as well. The magic system probably won't be many people's favorite of all time, but I will say is highly different than what you typically get in fantasy. It involves gunpowder, snorting it. That's really different. And there are actually multiple magic systems on display here. So for those of you who like the intertwining of magic systems, one versus the other, or how they can work together cooperatively, fully on display here, and was one of the most enjoyable aspects of the story to me. While each magic system itself is not the most deep or scientifically planned out, as is very popular in fantasy right now, they definitely interact with each other in intriguing ways and reflect the character who uses them very well. So I realized I got through this entire video without talking about the three different groups in detail, and while I don't have time to get into what each one does specifically, I would like to point out that this is a book that has a feature that I think a lot of people like, but some may not, where there is basically a structured system to the society. Basically, we have the privileged, the knacked, and the powder mages, all kind of in their own groups in terms of what they can do and how they interact with each other. And it's really well handled. For example, if you like the kind of light eyes versus dark eyes dynamic from the Stormlight Archive, it's not exactly that. It's different, but it's a similar kind of societal dynamic that's woven into this wider plot-woven story that is so well handled by Brian here that I feel like it's worth mentioning. And I think some people, especially those who did enjoy the kind of light eyes versus dark eyes dynamic we saw in Stormlight Archive, just pulling from a popular example, will enjoy that here as well. And this brings me to talking about the world of the Powder Mage Trilogy. It is gigantic, but I don't mean that in it's physically large or it's so deep sense, but everything that moves in this world feels so heavily weighted. We are constantly talking about armies colliding, nations reforming. It starts with a coup. I mean, this series starts with that level of initiating incident. That's not a spoiler. It starts there, and then we follow the ramifications of such drastic action for the three books. And that I found very appropriate. It does feel Napoleonic, and like we're following the types of characters who really can move nations. And for those who enjoy that level of stakes pretty much consistently throughout their story, you're handled. Because while there definitely is the personal type drama going on, there is consistently as well this massive weight of the gears of revolution propelling this trilogy to its conclusion, which feels inevitable. There's this feeling of like a leaf in a whirlpool, that this story is guiding itself to one moment, and when we finally reach there, this trilogy ends spectacularly. I can't say for sure whether Brian had the beginning to end of all 3 books completely planned out before he wrote them, but it's structured in a way, and I found the ending to be so spot on to what was needed, I would have a hard time believing he didn't, because this feels very well planned out. So okay, we've talked about the boring storytelling, character, world setting, blah 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 blah. The action. How is the action handled? The magic systems themselves lend brilliantly to the action throughout the pages, but I also found Brian's usage of Flintlock fantasy, the guns, the artillery, the cannons, to be the best I've ever seen. Granted, I'm not the most well-read in Flintlock fantasy as a subgenre I'm still introducing myself to, and I'm aware is diverse in its execution, but the way Brian writes guns is great. I like his detail to how these guns work, their accuracy, the characters' relationships to these weapons, all super well done and lend to when the actual action happens, you as the reader definitely feel how these guns can level any playing field. A bullet is a bullet, and Brian doesn't forget that. That's a criticism I have a lot of the times when guns are introduced to any story, really. Bullets are just treated as, oh, you know, he's shooting and nothing's really happening, pew pow bang bang, isn't that fun? The dumb bad action movie trope where people unload a clip at each other and no one gets hit. That is not an issue here, and if someone doesn't hit their target, there's usually a reason why, because we're following highly trained, disciplined soldiers, and the guns are advanced enough so that they're moderately accurate. Add that with the advantages of some of the magic system lent here, and there is a lethality to any fight scene or action battle scene here that I found outclasses many other fantasy stories. So I have the second and third book physically. The first one I still only have audio leak, but I highly recommend you pick these up, especially if you're looking to get into Flintlock fantasy. There is no better introduction for it right now, at least at my moderate level of understanding of the subgenre. And the audiobook performance is exceptional as well, definitely worth a listen if you're into audiobooks. I've had a very good run with military fantasy recently. I know some people it's not their favorite thing because there's just so much non-stop action, but I really do believe for the Powder Mage trilogy that might not be the case for a lot of people because these books have so much character driving the action, so many well-earned, interesting moments that have emotional weight that the action doesn't ever feel overwhelming or dumb. It just feels like it's the natural course of events for this really Napoleonic, grand scheme of things setting that our characters are standing at the core of. So if you have read the Powder Mage trilogy, let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. It's certainly not the greatest, epicest fantasy of all time, but in terms of this subgenre, I can't think of a better example. It is the leader, in my opinion, of Flintlock fantasy. If I'm wrong, give me some recommendations down below. I'd love to pick up more to explore how guns can interact with magic. And if you haven't read it, let me know if you're interested, or if just epic war fantasy is not for you, or if for some reason guns completely pull you out of the fantasy. I get it, some people have that issue, but like, let me know why, because this is a subgenre I think is going to continue to become more and more popular. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here, and let me know if you're okay with these like series reviews if I don't necessarily have enough to say book by book. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.